Conservative firebrand Charlie Kirk is dead. The 31-year-old was assassinated during the first stop of his American comeback tour in Utah. I'll tell you everything we know. Plus, Decarlos Brown Jr., the man accused of the brutal murder of a Ukrainian refugee in Charlotte, North Carolina, is speaking for the first time since the incident. We'll let you hear the disturbing jailhouse call he had with his sister. And in some lighter news, and we need some of that, scientists say they have the best evidence yet that there was once life on Mars. What makes them so optimistic this time? I'll give you all the details. Those stories and more today, Thursday, September 11th. I'm Caitlin Becker, and this is the New York Postcast. I want to begin today with our big story. Charlie Kirk, the conservative influencer and founder of Turning Point USA, was shot and killed during an event on the campus of Utah Valley University. The whole horrifying assassination was caught on camera. Kirk was hosting an event at the school. It was the first stop on his American comeback tour, which had been slated for 15 campus events over the next month and a half. Now, at these events, Kirk does a big question and answer bit with the crowd. In the very moment he was answering a question about mass shootings committed by transgender people, a single shot cracked through the air, and it struck him, forcing him to jerk backwards and grab his neck. Authorities say the shooter fired from an on-campus building about 200 yards away from where the 31-year-old was speaking. Kirk was a staunch supporter of President Trump, who posted a tribute that read in part, quote, "He was loved and admired by all, especially me, and now he is no longer with us. Charlie, we love you." He then ordered all flags to half-mast until Sunday evening. The Post editorial board published a piece in the aftermath of Charlie Kirk's death, and the associate editor for editorials, Seth Barron, joins me now. So Seth, firebrand. It's a word often bandied about around Charlie Kirk. We call him that in our own reporting on the Post, but you feel like that's a misnomer. What do you think made him different than other activists?
Well, thanks, Caitlin. I mean, the way I feel about it is that a firebrand, I think of somebody who is giving stump speeches, really riling up the crowd, something of a demagogue, somebody who's really trying to put the fear of God and fire up the crowd in that way. Now, I mean, Charlie Kirk did have that side to him, but what he was most known for, and this is what's so interesting about him, and I think actually is kind of unique, is he really took kind of a Socratic approach to spreading his message. And in a way, part of his message was that debate is essential to democracy. I mean, what he's known for is going to campuses and places like that and inviting anyone who wanted to engage with him to do so. And he would listen respectfully. He would argue, forcefully, but you didn't see him trying to shut people down. When we think about conservative speakers or commentators, a lot of the time we think of like the golden age of conservative radio. Rush Limbaugh was great, but
that's the first name that came to mind as soon as you said that.
But you didn't necessarily look to him for having an engaged discussion with an opponent. That wasn't his métier. But Charlie Kirk did do that. And it was remarkable in that he could have a lively debate with the opponent and remain respectful, tolerant, and, pleasant while being, forceful and principled.
Certainly
so that's
passionate.
Why I think in a sense he wasn't really so much a firebrand as something else. And I'm not exactly sure how we'll define it. I think, history is going to have to, or the future is going to have to decide that.
Yeah, and there's certainly a fair amount of controversy that was surrounding Charlie Kirk he's 31 years old, so very, very young, but for much of his young career, there was a fair amount of controversy. But for people who don't live kind of in this political orbit of activism that, you wrote about and that we deal with as reporters, can you tell me a bit about Turning Point USA? It's what he created and how that became so incredibly influential in American politics.
Yeah, it's really remarkable. I mean, look, I'm not somebody who gave a great deal of thought to Charlie Kirk before today. I mean, but it really is kind of astounding what he did. Yeah, at the age of 18, he founded this organization, Turning Point. which essentially was meant to be like an outreach to young conservatives, kind of like, the young Republicans were in the past, or those sort of groups. And it developed into this nationwide institution. It's got chapters all over the place, and they have national meetings. And it really galvanized conservative youth on campuses where, I mean, you're familiar with the way campuses are today. I mean, they're essentially hotbeds of like liberal social justice thought and critical race theory, and all the woke stuff is going on. So, and it's still pretty intense. I mean, even though it's been rolled back a little bit. So I think conservative youth on campuses felt somewhat alienated, and Turning Point was a way for them to meet each other, to convene, to share ideas, and to feel that they had that there was a place for them, and that there were people like them, and that these ideas were not evil, were not necessarily radical. They were just different from what was going on around them. So, and Turning Point, I mean, look, it really caught on, and it got the attention of some major figures,
including the president of the United States, who has previously really heaped praise on to Turning Point
Yes.
USA, and of course to Charlie Kirk himself for being so instrumental in mobilizing the youth vote, the MAGA youth vote specifically, who got him into office. But I want to turn my attention to something that you wrote in the opinion piece that you penned for the Post. You say, quote, "You can't even honestly call this a political killing. Kirk was no candidate or politician. His only power is the power of spoken word." But those lines have become so muddied on both sides, and politically motivated violence against Democrats and Republicans is just on the rise. So where do we go now as a nation?
Well, that's a really good question. Let me just point out that I participated in the writing, but it's not under my name. It's an editorial, so it's the New York Post's editorial board speaking. But yeah, I mean, taking that aside, look, America is in a dark position right now. There is a lot of political violence. We saw 2 assassination attempts on the president last year. I mean, he was the candidate then, but on Trump last year. There's this meme that goes around that's very popular on the left where they say, when it happens, like how they'll celebrate when it happens. And they don't spell out what they mean, but everybody knows what they mean. They mean like when the president dies, when Trump dies. You had those Minnesota legislators getting shot. You had the CEO of United Healthcare getting murdered. And again, people were celebrating that. I mean, even today, people are celebrating Charlie Kirk's death, which seems grotesque. I don't know where we're headed. It's certainly an ugly, ugly place. If we're going to start killing people who are just inviting other people to debate them, I mean, that's really completely antithetical to everything America has always been about. Look, the essence of liberal society, and meaning liberal in the sense of, liberty, and is built around the idea of free speech and assembly and discussion, not about killing people who you don't agree with.
Yeah, you can't just go around shooting people because you don't like what they say. And to be clear, we have no idea what the motive was for this particular situation, certainly at this point that you and I are recording this on late Wednesday night. So it really does become a question of how free is free speech? Can you disagree and hate what a person says while still allowing them to say it, because that's what is under the Constitution? And then there's the question of how you feel about something like gun violence or violence. If you're pushing for, no restrictions on guns or restrictions on guns, where do you stand when someone you don't like gets killed in that manner? So it really does raise a lot of really interesting questions for debate, which, as you said, like him or hate him, like what he said, hate what he said, like what he stood for, hate what he stood for. Debate is something that Charlie Kirk really made his brand. Seth, I want to thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Caitlin.
Now to the latest on the brutal murder of Ukrainian refugee Irina Zarutska. Accused killer Decarlos Brown Jr. spoke to his family from jail and reportedly admitted to them initially that he stabbed Zarutska because he believed she was reading his mind. Now, his sister, Tracy Brown, who was herself victimized by Decarlos in a 2022 attack, says he's a paranoid schizophrenic who's told her on multiple occasions that the government implanted a chip in him. This is audio from later in that phone call between Tracy and Decarlos. He has a slightly different reason for the killing this time, where he blames, quote, materials put in his body by the government.
You know that's not me. I'm talking about just for no reason. But since they did that, now they got to investigate the material in my body exposed to. Since they want to do all that, now they got to investigate. Whoever was working the material, they lashed out on.
President Trump weighed in again on the tragedy, posting online a tribute to the victim, who he called a beautiful young lady from Ukraine who came to America searching for peace and safety. Her killer, he called an animal and said the trial should be quick and the end should be the death penalty. Now to former Vice President Kamala Harris. The ex-Veep has a book coming out, and we're getting a sneak peek at what's inside. She blasts her former boss in the book, rebuking President Biden's, quote, recklessness for deciding to run for a second term. In the book, first obtained by The Atlantic, she also writes of Biden's second-term hopes. Quote, this wasn't a choice that should have been left to an individual's ego, an individual's ambition. It should have been more than a personal decision. The tough talk was a surprise to Biden aides who spoke to the Post. One of them noted that they think Harris admitting she should have said something sooner hurts her chances at a political comeback. The aide said, quote, no one wants a leader that can't speak truth to power. As for the then president's health and ability to do the job, she writes, quote, I don't believe it was incapacity. If I believed that, I would have said so. As loyal as I am to President Biden, I am more loyal to my country. Now over to Europe. A barrage of Russian drones were shot down this week, not in Ukraine, but in Poland. Now, this is a big deal because Poland is a member of NATO, and that means that an attack on one NATO nation is like an attack on all. President Trump was quick to react to the news, posting, quote, what's with Russia violating Poland's airspace with drones? Here we go. Now, it's not really clear what he meant there by here we go, but if Russia was being provocative on purpose, it represents a ratcheting up of tensions between Russia and the West, and that could be messy. And if it was not purposeful, then that's also pretty messy. The fear in that case is that Russia doesn't know what it's doing when it comes to their drone program. Neither option is ideal. So I asked the Post's Washington reporter Diana Nerozzi about what sources there are saying, Russian provocation or Russian error.
The Russians are saying that the drones were not intended to hit Poland, and I saw some officials even saying that perhaps it was Ukraine. And that there's no proof that it was Russian drones.
Of course they did. Honestly, of course they did. Because that just seems to be straight out of their playbook.
But I was talking to a source in Poland today, and he said that it's clearly an attack. It's not, a mistake for so many drones to be flying into Poland from Belarus and from Russia. So the Poles are really seeing this as a direct attack.
Poland has been gathering intelligence since the incident and plans to convene a meeting of the country's National Security Council today. Now some news from Mars. Good news or bad news depends on how you feel about extraterrestrials. NASA's Perseverance rover has been road tripping around the surface of the red planet for the last 4.5 years, and a study published in the journal Nature says it captured photos of what may be the strongest evidence ever of life on Mars. A series of rocks discovered in what was once a Martian riverbed are believed to contain greenish dots dubbed poppy seeds and leopard spots. Okay, so not exactly aliens from another planet, but it's something. Scientists say the spots are traces of iron phosphate and iron sulfide. On Earth, those compounds are released when microorganisms devour organic matter. They're referred to as biosignatures. Scientists do say there are other possible non-biological origins for such material, but the lead researcher of the new study suggests that the most likely scenario, given all of the information, is that this evidence comes from, quote, microbial activity, aka life. Now, we're basing all of this on info that's being sent back from the rover. No Martian material has actually made its way Earthside, and of course, we brought Matt Damon back from Mars ages ago. Now, when the rover's mission began, NASA expected to get those actual samples back here on Earth by 2030, but that date has been pushed back a full decade thanks to budget cuts. And finally today, as we mark the 24th anniversary of the 9/11 attacks, a feel-good story that has come from the tragedy of that day. Raphael Jarvis is a retired New York City police officer. He spent months after the terror attacks digging through the rubble in search of survivors. In 2003, he served in the U.S. Army during the Iraq invasion, and like so many veterans, he had a rough time after retiring from the military in 2004. And he was diagnosed with PTSD, depression, and anxiety. But this story does have a pretty happy ending. In 2023, he connected for the first time with his best friend, Ben. Ben is a highly trained golden retriever from a group called Canines for Warriors. Raphael says his furry friend makes him feel good and makes him feel safe. The two are never apart, and that will be true today when the man and man's best friend visit Ground Zero together for this somber anniversary. We really do not deserve dogs. They are too pure for this world. Now, it has been a pretty heavy day of news here on the Postcast, so if you need a little pick-me-up, head to the New York Post in print or online. I am positive page 6 has something fun right now, and we need that. And don't forget, like and follow the New York Postcast wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. You won't miss an episode, and you'll get to keep waking up with me every morning.